She was a ghost in the machine, a whisper on the radio, a name on a manifest that most of the men in her unit actively tried to ignore. Chief Warrant Officer 2. Jasmine Night Stalker. Reed was one of the few, the proud, the absolute best, a pilot in the Army's elite 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. Her call sign wasn't just a nod to the regiment's name. It was a statement of fact. She lived in the darkness, thrived in it, flew into it when the world was asleep, and pulled special operators out of hellish situations before the first ray of sunlight could expose them. She could thread a MH-60M Blackhawk through a mountain pass in zero visibility, relying on her night vision goggles and instruments with a preternatural calm that bordered on robotic. To her male counterparts, she was an anomaly, a disruption to the good old boy network. They didn't see her skill. They saw a woman in a world they considered sacredly masculine. They dismissed her with snide comments, cold shoulders, and the silent treatment that was louder than any insult. They called her the waiver, implying she'd only gotten her slot to fill a diversity quota. They whispered that she was a distraction, a liability, a PR move by the Pentagon. Jasmine heard it all, the words carried on the rotor wash like bitter confetti. But she never responded. She couldn't. Her father, a retired command sergeant major, had drilled one piece of advice into her head since she was old enough to hold a joystick on a flight simulator. Let your flying do the talking. The birds don't care if you're a man or a woman. They only respond to skill. You prove yourself in the air, not in the barracks. So she kept her head down, her visor down, and her mouth shut. She flew her missions with a flawless record, inserting and extracting Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators, and Army Rangers from the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. She had saved countless lives, yet she couldn't buy a shred of respect in the officers' mess. The only person who truly saw her was her crew chief, a grizzled veteran named Master Sergeant Frank Possum Hayes, who treated her with the same professional deference he'd give any pilot who could keep a helicopter in one piece during a dust storm. "Don't let 'em get to you, ma'am," Possum would say, his voice crackling over the intercom. You're the best stick in the battalion. Their egos are just bruised because they know it." Jasmine would merely acknowledge the comment with a quiet, "Thanks, Possum," and focus on the glowing green landscape below. The dismissal stung, a constant, low-grade ache that she'd learned to compartmentalize. She was a soldier. She had a job to do. She didn't need their approval. She needed their professionalism. But deep down, in the quiet moments before sleep, she wondered if she would ever truly belong. The loneliness of being the only woman in a sea of hostile masculinity was a heavier burden than any gear she carried on a mission. She was prepared to carry it for her entire career, a silent sacrifice for the love of flying. Then came the op that would change everything. The mission, designated Operation Phantom Reach, was a nightmare from the start. A 4-man SEAL reconnaissance team had been compromised deep in the Shurandam Valley, in a treacherous stretch of land known for its steep canyon walls and as a primary artery for Taliban and Haqqani network fighters. The team, call sign Viking, had been inserted days earlier to confirm the location of a high-value target. But their hide site was blown. They were now running and gunning, pursued by a numerically superior force trying to reach a marginally defensible position in the valley's northern ridge. The original extraction plan was scrapped, and a daylight rescue was impossible. The enemy had line of sight on most of the valley floor. A fast rope insertion by another team was deemed too risky, as the landing zones were too hot. The only hope for Viking team was a night extraction from a confined, unimproved landing zone, a tiny sliver of flat ground no bigger than a 2-car garage, perched on the side of a cliff and surrounded by 100-foot rock spires. It was a pilot's worst nightmare. and a maneuver the Night Stalkers called a pinnacle landing on steroids. The command staff convened in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, the air thick with tension and the acrid smell of old coffee. On the large digital map, the potential LZ was just a tiny blinking dot of red. The lead briefing officer, a lieutenant colonel from the Aviation Brigade, laid out the parameters. The winds are unpredictable, gusting up to 40 knots. The approach will be from the south, but you'll have to drop in blind behind that ridgeline. You'll clear those spires by maybe 20 feet on either side. It's a one-shot deal. If you miss the approach, you can't go around. You'll be sitting ducks. He looked at the assembled pilots. 3 of the most seasoned male pilots in the unit, all with over a decade of experience and egos to match, stared at the screen, their faces masks of calculated hesitation. One of them, CW4 Mike Maverick Morrison, shook his head. "Sir, with all due respect, that's a suicide mission. The wind shear alone could slam us into the cliff face. We need to consider a different option, maybe a halo drop of a QRF to secure a better LZ. Another pilot, CW3, David Slider Jensen, nodded in agreement. Maverick's right. That approach is a coffin with a rotor on top. There's no margin for error. The room fell silent, the weight of the failing mission pressing down on everyone. They were professionals, not cowards. They were simply stating the unvarnished truth of the tactical situation. The SEALs were going to die if they couldn't get someone in there. In the back of the room, standing ramrod straight and unnoticed as usual, Jasmine Reed listened. She studied the topography, the wind readings, the approach angles. Her mind wasn't filled with fear or hesitation. It was filled with calculations. Airspeed, density altitude, torque, rotor RPM. She saw the problem not as a suicide mission, but as a complex equation. She saw a path. She saw a way. She took a half step forward, her voice quiet but clear in the tense silence. "Sir, I can make that approach." Every head in the room swiveled toward her. The silence that followed was different from before. It was a hostile, incredulous silence. Maverick scoffed, a short, derisive sound. "Oh, give me a break. The waiver thinks she can do what we just said was impossible." Slider just shook his head, turning back to the map, dismissing her with his body language. "This isn't a training exercise, sweetheart. This is real. People die out here." The lieutenant colonel looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Chief Reed, this is a very high-risk maneuver." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just pointed to the screen. "I see a 3-step approach. I'll come in high and hot over the southern ridge to bleed off speed. I'll use a deceleration curve to drop altitude while maintaining positive control, then do a pedal turn to starboard just as I clear those spires to align with the LZ. The wind shear will be at my back for the final descent, not against me. It's tight, but the bird can do it. I can do it." Her analysis was crisp, professional, and technically flawless. She had just outlined a maneuver that would have most test pilots reaching for a barf bag. But before the colonel could respond, the heavy wooden door to the TOC swung open and a man walked in. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with the coiled intensity of a predator. He wore the distinctive khakis and trident of a Navy SEAL, his face streaked with camouflage paint and his eyes cold as Arctic ice. This was Lieutenant Commander William Duke Riker, the commander of Viking Team, the man on the ground whose voice had been crackling over the satellite link with increasing urgency for the last hour. He'd been listening to the entire debate from the hallway. He walked straight to the map, not glancing at anyone, and pointed to the blinking red dot. "My men are pinned down. They have 2 wounded. They have less than 90 minutes of ammunition left, and the bad guys are closing in for the kill." His voice was low, gravelly, and left no room for argument. He finally looked up, his gaze sweeping across the assembled pilots. lingering for a moment on the three who had deemed the mission impossible. Then his eyes landed on Jasmine. He didn't see a woman. He didn't see the waiver. He saw the only person in the room who had offered a solution. He saw the focus in her eyes, the quiet confidence that was the hallmark of every elite operator he'd ever served with. He looked at the lieutenant colonel, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of a commander on the ground. He didn't ask. He ordered. "Sir, I don't have time for a debate. Night Stalker," he said, his gaze locked on Jasmine. "You're on." The dismissal that had followed her for years evaporated in an instant, silenced not by a plea or a complaint, but by the direct order of a man whose only concern was the lives of his brothers. Jasmine met his gaze, gave a single sharp nod, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. Possum was already on his feet, heading for the hangar to pre-flight the Black Hawk. The whispers and the doubt were left behind in the stale air of the TOC. The only thing that mattered now was the mission. The flight to the Sharandam Valley was a blur of terrain and tension. Jasmine flew low and fast, hugging the contours of the earth to stay below enemy radar, the Black Hawk's rotors thumping a frantic rhythm against the night sky. In the back, Possum and their medic, a young specialist named Timmons, were silently preparing medical gear and extra ammunition. And the intercom was mostly quiet, each of them lost in their own pre-mission ritual. Jasmine's world had shrunk to the glowing green display of her night vision goggles and the steady hum of the instruments. She could feel the helicopter as an extension of her own body, every vibration and shudder a piece of data her brain processed automatically. As she approached the southern ridge, she called out over the encrypted radio. "Viking Actual, this is Stalker. Inbound. 5 mics out. Confirm you are ready for immediate extract." The radio crackled, and Duke Riker's voice came back, calm and controlled despite the chaos she knew he was in. "Stalker, Viking Actual, roger that. We are ready. The party is getting lively up here. We'll pop green smoke on your mark." "Copy, Viking. On my mark. Stand by." Jasmine crested the ridge, and the valley opened up before her like a scene from a nightmare. Tracer fire arced through the darkness from multiple directions, converging on a small cluster of boulders near the cliff face. She could see the muzzle flashes from the SEALs' positions, returning fire, holding the line. She had no time to admire their courage. She had to fly. She banked the helicopter hard, descending at a rate that made the G-forces press her into her seat. The wind grabbed them, just as predicted, but she was ready, using the controls to ride the current instead of fighting it. The rock spires loomed ahead, jagged teeth reaching for the sky. They were too close. Possum's breathing became a little faster in her headphones. "Easy, girl," she whispered to the helicopter, making infinitesimal adjustments. They shot through the gap, the skids missing the rocks by what felt like inches. Immediately, she kicked the left pedal, spinning the helicopter 180 degrees, the tail rotor sweeping just past another outcropping. The small LZ was directly below her now, a postage stamp of dirt. She flared the nose up, killing her forward speed, and dropped the Black Hawk straight down. It was a controlled fall, a feat of aeronautical defiance against gravity and common sense. The wheels touched the ground with a gentle bump, perfectly centered in the tiny zone. "Viking Actual, Stalker is on the deck. Let's go, let's go, let's go!" The rear ramp dropped, and 4 shadowy figures burst from the rocks, half carrying 2 more. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. It's the uninjured SEALs laying down suppressive fire as they retreated. Possum and Timmons were at the ramp, grabbing the wounded, pulling them inside. Duke Riker was the last one on, still firing his rifle at the advancing enemy until he was literally stepping onto the ramp. As soon as he was inside, Jasmine didn't wait for a confirmation. She pulled maximum pitch on the collective, and the Black Hawk leaped off the ground, its engine screaming in protest. As they climbed away, The LZ below them erupted in a series of massive explosions. The JDAM bombs from an Air Force drone, called in by Riker just as they lifted off, obliterating the enemy fighters who had been seconds away from overrunning his team. Jasmine didn't look back. She pointed the nose toward home and flew, the adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a profound sense of relief. In the back, the medics were already working on the wounded. And Duke Riker, his heart still hammering against his ribs, sat on the floor of the helicopter staring at the closed ramp. He'd just watched a pilot perform a miracle. He'd just heard a voice, calm and steady in the midst of chaos, guide them to safety. He had called her Night Stalker without even knowing her real name. But he was determined to learn it. The flight back to Bagram Airfield was long and quiet, each person aboard processing the near-death experience in their own way. For Jasmine, the focus remained on flying. She didn't allow herself the luxury of celebration or relief until the wheels were firmly on the ground and the rotors had spun to a stop. Only then did she lean her head back against the rest, close her eyes, and let out a long, slow breath. The door to the cockpit opened, and she heard the heavy tread of combat boots. She turned to see Duke Riker standing there, still covered in dust and sweat, his face a mask of exhaustion. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her, or really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The dismissive chatter from the other pilots, the condescending nicknames, the lonely isolation of her career, it all seemed like a distant, irrelevant memory. In the confined space of the cockpit, there was only the quiet understanding between two professionals who had just stared death in the face and won. "Chief," he finally said, his voice rough, That was the finest piece of flying I have ever seen. You saved my team, yet you saved my life." Jasmine met his gaze. "I was just doing my job, Commander." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first crack in his stern facade. "I know, and you do it better than anyone I've ever met. Thank you." He held out his hand. She took it. His grip was firm and warm. He didn't let go immediately. "I'm Duke." "Jasmine," she replied. "I know," he said. "I asked Possum on the way back. He had a lot to say about you. All of it good." Jasmine felt a blush creep up her neck, a foreign sensation. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from a SEAL commander. As they finally exited the helicopter, the reception on the tarmac was different. The news of the rescue had spread like wildfire through the base. The three pilots from the TOC were there, standing off to the side, their faces a mixture of shame and grudging respect. Maverick caught her eye for a second, then looked away. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one had to. The mission itself had been the ultimate rebuttal. They had said it was impossible. She had done it. The dismissal was over. But as Jasmine walked toward the debriefing, she felt Duke fall into step beside her. The professional respect was there, solid and earned. But she also felt something else, a spark of connection that had nothing to do with rank or regiment. The mission was a success. Her skill had been proven beyond any doubt. But for Jasmine Reed, the most dangerous and unpredictable part of the night was just beginning. She had finally been seen, and the man who saw her was not going to look away. In the days that followed Operation Phantom Reach, the atmosphere around the base shifted palpably. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but their tone changed. They were no longer dismissive. They were curious, respectful, even awed. Jasmine found herself being nodded at in the chow hall, a silent acknowledgement from men who had previously looked through her. The change was unsettling. She had grown so accustomed to the cold shoulder that the warmth of acceptance felt foreign. She kept to her routine, focusing on maintenance checks and flight planning, but her mind kept drifting back to one variable she hadn't accounted for: Lieutenant Commander William Riker. He was a constant presence, finding reasons to be near the aviation hangar. He'd show up with questions about helicopter capabilities, which would lead to discussions about specific missions, which would lead to conversations that had nothing to do with work at all. He told her about his upbringing in Montana, the son of a hunting guide, how he'd joined the Navy to see the world and found a family in the SEAL teams. She found herself sharing stories about her father, the command sergeant major who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd taught her to fish and field strip an M4 with equal patience. The connection was undeniable, a gravitational pull that grew stronger with each encounter. Possum noticed, of course. Possum noticed everything. One afternoon, as they were running through a post-flight checklist, he leaned against the helicopter skid and fixed her with a knowing look. "That SEAL commander sure is interested in our birds, isn't he, ma'am? I've never met a frogman so fascinated with rotor torque before." Jasmine kept her eyes on the maintenance log. "He's a professional. He wants to understand our capabilities for future joint ops." Possum snorted. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that man's not looking at the helicopter. He's looking at the pilot. And from where I'm standing, you're looking back." Jasmine snapped the logbook shut. "Possum, you're a crew chief, not a matchmaker. Now did you check the number 3 blade for stress fractures like I asked?" Possum grinned, unrepentant. "Yes, ma'am. They're perfect, just like that landing you made." He walked away, chuckling to himself. Jasmine watched him go, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. He wasn't wrong. She was looking back, and that was the problem. She had spent her entire career building walls, creating a persona that was all business, all professionalism. Letting someone in, and especially someone as intense and compelling as Duke, felt like a violation of her own survival code. Relationships were complications. Complications got people killed. She had to maintain focus. But Duke was not a man easily deterred. That evening, he found her on the observation deck, a small platform overlooking the runway where she often went to watch the sunsets, the only time the Afghan landscape looked almost beautiful. He didn't say anything at first. He just leaned on the railing next to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling air. They watched the sky bleed from orange to purple to black. Finally, he spoke. "I'm heading out tomorrow. Another op. Don't know when I'll be back." Jasmine's stomach tightened, a reaction she hadn't expected and couldn't control. She kept her voice even. "Then you should be resting, Commander. Not standing out here." "I've got plenty of time to rest when I'm dead," he said, a hint of dark humor in his tone. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I didn't come here to talk about the mission. I came here to say something I should have said days ago." He paused, searching for the right words. "Jasmine, I've been around the world. I've seen a lot of brave people do a lot of incredible things. But I have never ever seen anyone do what you did the other night. You didn't just fly a helicopter. You willed it into that LZ. You defied every law of physics and every odd they were stacking against us, and you did it with a calm that I aspire to have in a firefight." Jasmine shook her head, deflecting. "It's just training. It's just—" "No," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "It's not just training. It's who you are. You're a warrior, and I know we're not supposed to mix. Different branches, different rules. I know the risks. But I also know that I've spent the last 4 days looking for excuses to be near you, and I'm tired of pretending it's for professional reasons." He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers in the fading light. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not promising anything. I just needed you to know that when I'm out there in the dark doing what I do, I'm going to be thinking about you. And that's not a distraction. That's the clearest I've felt in years." Jasmine was frozen, made caught between the instinct to retreat and the overwhelming pull to step forward. This was the moment she had always feared, the moment where professionalism collided with humanity. She opened her mouth, not knowing what would come out, when the loudspeaker crackled across the base, calling Duke's team for a final brief. The spell was broken. He gave her a small, sad smile. "Duty calls." He turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine alone on the observation deck, her heart pounding against her ribs like a rotor blade out of balance. She watched him disappear into the darkness, and for the first time in her career, she prayed for someone else's safety more than her own. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled anxiety. Jasmine threw herself into her work, flying mission after mission, but a part of her was always listening for news, always scanning casualty reports. She had no right to worry about him, no claim on his safety. But the worry was there anyway, a constant hum beneath the rotor wash. She flew her missions with the same flawless precision, earning even more respect from her unit. Maverick actually nodded at her in passing one day, a monumental shift in their dynamic. But the professional victories felt hollow without someone to share them with. Then, late one night, she was in the hangar, running diagnostics, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was. Duke looked thinner, and darker circles under his eyes, but he was whole. He was alive. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to her and pulled her into an embrace, holding her tight against his chest. Jasmine stiffened for a split second, a lifetime of defensive reflexes kicking in. And then she melted. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of dust, sweat, and survival. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who lived in a world of violence and chaos, finding a moment of perfect peace in each other's arms. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look at her face. "I thought about you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single night. It's what kept me going." Jasmine reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I thought about you too. I checked the reports every morning." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I don't know how this works. I don't know what happens next. We're both deployed. I both have jobs that could kill us tomorrow, but I know I don't want to waste another minute pretending this isn't real." For once, Jasmine didn't think about regulations or consequences. She didn't think about the dismissive voices from her past or the walls she'd built. She only thought about the warmth of his arms and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Then don't pretend," she whispered. He kissed her then, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened as she responded. When they finally broke apart, the hangar lights seemed brighter, the night air warmer. It wasn't a solution to their impossible situation. It wasn't a guarantee of a future. It was simply a beginning, a promise whispered in the darkness between two people who made their living in the night. The dismissal was a distant memory. The mission was a shared triumph. But this fragile, dangerous, exhilarating connection was something entirely new. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine Reed was willing to take the risk. Their secret meetings became the anchor of their existence, stolen moments in the shadow of war. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Duke's jaw tightened before a dangerous op, the way Jasmine hummed old country songs under her breath while checking her instruments. They shared meals in out-of-the-way corners of the base, talked about families and dreams, about the civilian lives waiting for them that neither could quite imagine. Possum became an unwitting accomplice, covering for Jasmine when Duke was around, his gruff exterior hiding a soft spot for the romance unfolding under his nose. "Just be careful, ma'am," he warned her one day. "This life, it doesn't give you many happy endings." Jasmine knew he was right. She'd seen the statistics, the casualty reports, the families shattered by a single knock on the door. But being with Duke felt like the first real thing she'd experienced since joining the military. And flying was her passion, her purpose. But Duke made her feel human. He challenged her, softened her, made her laugh in ways she'd forgotten she could. One evening, they lay on a blanket on the observation deck, staring up at a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled milk. Duke's arm was around her, her head on his chest. "What happens when this is over?" she asked quietly, voicing the question that had been haunting her. "The war, I mean, or our deployments. What happens to us?" Duke was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never been good at the future. I've always lived in the next mission, the next firefight. But with you, I find myself thinking about things I never thought about before. A house, a dog, maybe even—" He trailed off. Jasmine lifted her head to look at him. "Maybe even what?" He met her gaze, and in the starlight, she saw a vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. Maybe even a reason to hang up the trident, to stop being a weapon and start being a person. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. For a man like Duke, the SEALs weren't just a job, they were an identity. To even contemplate leaving was a seismic shift. Jasmine laid her head back down, processing his words. "I don't know who I am without a helicopter," she confessed. "My father always said the sky was my home, or the ground was just where I parked." Duke chuckled softly. "Sounds like we're a pair of broken toys, huh? Too damaged for normal life, too good at our jobs to walk away." "Maybe," Jasmine said. "Or maybe we're just not done yet. Maybe when we are, we'll figure it out together." He squeezed her tighter. Together. I liked the sound of that. But the war wasn't done with them yet. The next morning, Duke was summoned for an urgent briefing. A high-value target had been located. A terrorist leader responsible for countless American deaths. The mission was risky, a direct assault on a fortified compound. Duke's team would be the tip of the spear. He found Jasmine before he left, pulling her into a maintenance bay for a final embrace. "This one's bad," he said, not bothering to hide his concern. "I can feel it." Jasmine held him tight, memorizing the feel of him. "Then be careful. Come back to me." He kissed her forehead. "Always." She watched him walk away, and his broad shoulders disappearing through the hangar door. She whispered a prayer to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, and then she went back to work, because that was what soldiers did. The hours crawled by. Jasmine couldn't focus, her mind constantly wandering to the operation unfolding in the darkness. She ran the same diagnostic checks 3 times, each time forgetting where she was. Possum finally ordered her to go to her quarters and rest, but sleep was impossible. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant thump of helicopters coming and going. Just after midnight, the base went on high alert. Sirens blared. Jasmine was on her feet and running before she was fully conscious, her flight suit half-zipped. She burst into the TOC, her heart in her throat. The room was chaos. Officers shouting into phones, screens displaying drone footage of a burning compound. She grabbed Possum's arm. "What happened?" Possum's face was grim. The op went sideways. They were compromised on insertion. The team is taking heavy fire. They've got multiple casualties." Jasmine's blood turned to ice. "Which team?" Possum didn't answer. He didn't have to. She saw it on the screen. The call sign, blinking red. Viking. She pushed past him, toward the operations officer. "I'm taking a bird. I need coordinates now." The officer, a major she didn't know, shook his head. "Stand down, Chief. We've already got a bird en route." "It's not enough," Jasmine shot back, her voice cracking with urgency. "They need more than one. They need extraction, not reinforcement. I can get in there." The major hesitated, and in that hesitation, Jasmine saw the old dismissal flickering in his eyes. She was a woman, emotional, compromised. He opened his mouth to refuse her, but before he could speak, a voice cut through the chaos. It was the same lieutenant colonel from the Sharandam briefing. And he looked at Jasmine, saw the terror and determination warring on her face, and made a decision. "Give her the coordinates. Chief Reed, you're on." Jasmine didn't wait for thanks. She was out the door, running for her helicopter, Possum right behind her. The mission was all that mattered now. The man she loved was dying, and she was the only one who could save him. The night was about to get a lot darker. The flight to the compound was the longest of Jasmine's life. See, every second stretched into an eternity, her mind racing through 1,000 catastrophic scenarios. She forced herself to focus on the instruments, on the terrain, on the mission. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. Duke needed a pilot, not a girlfriend. The compound appeared on her sensors, a cluster of buildings nestled in a narrow valley, smoke rising from multiple fires. The drone footage had shown intense ground combat, the surviving SEALs pinned down in a central courtyard, fighting off waves of attackers. The original extraction helicopter had been damaged by small arms fire and forced to withdraw. It was up to her now. "Viking Actual, this is Stalker 2. Inbound 3 mics. Status?" The radio crackled, and a voice responded, but it wasn't Duke's. It was his second-in-command, a senior chief she'd met once. "Stalker 2, Viking 6. Actual is down. I say again, Actual is down. We need extract now." Jasmine's heart stopped. Down. The word could mean wounded. It could mean dead. She couldn't afford to find out which. She had to get in there. The approach was even worse than the Shurandam LZ. The compound was surrounded by tall trees, and the courtyard was small, littered with debris. Enemy fighters were everywhere, their muzzle flashes creating a lethal fireworks display. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She dropped the Black Hawk like a stone, weaving between the trees, using the helicopter itself as a weapon. Made the rotor wash, scattering fighters on the ground. She flared at the last possible second, slamming the wheels onto the courtyard dirt. The ramp dropped, and Possum and Timmons were out, laying down covering fire, dragging wounded SEALs aboard. Jasmine scanned the chaos, her eyes searching for one face. And then she saw him. Duke was being carried by 2 of his men, his leg bloody, his face pale, but his eyes were open. He was alive. He was alive. They loaded him onto the helicopter, and then Jasmine didn't wait for the all clear. She lifted off, taking fire, ignoring the pings of bullets against the fuselage, climbing, 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 until the valley fell away and they were in the clear night sky. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She handed control to her co-pilot and stumbled into the back. Duke was on a stretcher, Timmons working on his leg. His eyes found hers, and despite the pain, despite the blood, he smiled. "Told you I'd come back," Jasmine whispered, yet kneeling beside him, taking his hand. He squeezed it weakly. "You're late," he rasped. "I had to make an entrance," she replied, tears streaming down her face. Around them, the surviving SEALs watched, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and wonder. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. A pilot, flying through hell to save the man she loved. The dismissal was ancient history, the respect was absolute, and the love, forged in the crucible of combat, was unbreakable. The recovery was slow, measured in weeks of hospital stays and physical therapy. Duke's leg was badly damaged. The doctors uncertain if he'd ever run again, let alone return to the teams. He took the news with the stoicism of a man who'd faced worse odds. But Jasmine saw the fear in his eyes, not of the injury, but of the life without purpose that might follow. She stayed by his side whenever she could, flying back to Bagram, then to Landstuhl in Germany, and then finally to Walter Reed in Washington. The military bureaucracy for once seemed to understand. Perhaps it was the heroism of the rescue, perhaps it was the simple power of their story, but they were given leeway, allowed to be together in a way that would have been unthinkable just months before. During the long days of recovery, they talked about everything and nothing. They planned a future that neither had dared imagine before. A small house, somewhere quiet, maybe near water for Duke, and near mountains for her. A compromise. A life. "I meant what I said," Duke told her one evening, his leg propped up, her head on his shoulder. "About hanging up the trident. This injury, it might make the decision for me." Jasmine looked up at him. "And if it doesn't? If you can go back?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I'd have a choice to make. You or them." "That's not fair," she said softly. "I would never ask you to choose." "I know," he replied. That's why I'd choose you." The words settled over them, a promise more profound than any wedding vow. In the end, the choice was made for him. The leg healed, but not enough. The doctors cleared him for limited duty, but the teams required 100%. Duke Riker's career as an active SEAL was over. He took the news with a calm that surprised everyone, including himself. "It's okay," he told Jasmine. "I did my time. I saw my battles. Now I get to live." He transitioned to a training role, teaching the next generation of warriors at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. It was a different life, but a meaningful one, and it allowed him to be with Jasmine when she wasn't deployed. Their relationship, tested by fire, grew stronger in the calm. They learned the small rhythms of domesticity, groceries, movies, lazy Sunday mornings that were more terrifying than any firefight, but they learned them together. Jasmine continued to fly, her reputation now legendary within the Night Stalkers. She was no longer dismissed. She was sought after, her opinion valued, her skills revered. She trained younger pilots, especially the few women who followed in her path, teaching them what her father had taught her. Let your flying do the talking. But she added her own lesson, and when you find someone worth talking to, don't be afraid to use your voice. On a warm evening in Virginia, you're with the sun setting over the Potomac, Duke got down on one knee, his bad leg protesting slightly, and asked her to marry him. Jasmine said yes without hesitation, without calculation, without fear. The girl who had been dismissed, the pilot who had been ignored, the woman who had built walls around her heart, was now standing in the open, loved and loving. The wedding was small, held at the Naval Academy Chapel. Possum was there, tears streaming down his weathered face. And the surviving members of Viking team formed an honor guard, and when the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in cheers. Duke kissed her, long and deep, and when they broke apart, he whispered against her lips, "Night Stalker, you're mine." Jasmine laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I always was," she replied. "You just had to order it." The dismissal was a scar, a memory of a time before. The mission was a legend, a story they would tell their children. But this, the love, the life, the